Hello everyone, this is Perry Nakber and I'm going to be showing you guys how to operate a fully manual camera. So that means it's got no batteries, all just mechanical stuff. So this is a Pentax Asahi SV, got it off eBay. It's a very cool camera, pretty old, it's from the 60s, and it shoots photos using film, and that's the first thing that we're going to cover. So I'm using some Portra 800. Keep that number in mind. I'll go back to it in a bit. So this is the film, and you can see that there's two sides to it. It's got a very shiny side and a more dull side. And this duller side is the emulsion side, so it can actually pick up images, and that is the side that you are going to be putting into your camera so that it is facing out of the lens. So that's the dull side. You want it going out. So first you just load it in like that. Then you're going to want to stretch it across here, laying it flat, and you tuck it in to, there's a little knob right here. Okay, and now just tighten it so that it is flush. Make sure that it is poking through those little metal knobs there, so it's actually going to wind. And then you just gotta close that up, make sure it locks all the way, and you're good. So the first two cocks of this are going to do nothing because that film in there has already been exposed to light, and so those images are ruined. So the first one, you just cock it, it's prepared, and then you've got the actual shutter release button right there, and it'll make a very satisfying sound, which is nice. So just go through the first two of those. And now you're ready to actually take some pictures. Okay, now that we've loaded the film, it's time to learn how to actually operate this camera. So first off, remember what the number here was. It's 800. This is indicating what the ISO of the film is. So ISO is the film's sensitivity to light. So when using the manual camera, you expose the film to light, and that is what produces the image. So higher value ISOs indicate a greater sensitivity to light, and lower ISO values have less sensitivity to light. And so what ISO tells us is what we need to set the shutter speed to. So shutter speed is the amount of time that the shutter exposes the film to light. The shutter is just a window essentially, which is opened and closed very quickly to allow light to reach the actual film. And here is the dial that controls the shutter speed. You can see the different numbers that it's got on it. This is indicating what fraction of a second the shutter speed is going to be open for. So you want to set it to the value closest to what the ISO is. And you can see I've got 250, 500, 1000. I'm going to set it at 1/1000th of a second because that is the closest to the ISO. And that's generally the rule of thumb. You can change it around, but that's different topic. Another thing that affects how much light is being allowed to reach the film is the aperture. So this dial on the lens that I am currently rotating controls what the aperture is, and it is indicated by f-stops, and it goes from an f-stop of 1.8 all the way to an f-stop of 16. So the higher values let in less light, lower values let in more light. And if I turn the camera around here, you can actually see as the aperture is opened up and closed, which is pretty neat. Alrighty, now that we have covered ISO and aperture, there's a little bit more explaining I need to do for how to use aperture. And that is the Sunny 16 rule. So the Sunny 16 rule is just a easy guide for how you should be setting your aperture based off what situation you're in. So let's start with f-stop of 16. That's a very high aperture. That means that the aperture is mostly closed and not letting in a lot of light. So for using f16, you should only be doing that when it is a fully sunny day, very bright outside. There's a lot of light, and you need to make sure that the film doesn't get overexposed. Next is f11 about. For f11, you'll be doing this for when you've got a partially cloudy day. So, limited amount of light, but still bright. You want to make sure you're not getting your film underexposed or overexposed. And then, going down a bit more, you've got f8. For f8 is when you have a mostly cloudy day. The sun is pretty much completely blocked by clouds, but there's still a decent amount of light coming through. So you want to open it up a little bit more so that you aren't getting an underexposed film. So now when you go even further down to about f5.6, you use that for when you have very cloudy days. Kind of like when it's about to rain, storm, darker. So you want to make sure that the aperture is opened up a bit more so that you're letting in enough light. And then when you get down to about f4 and below, and you're only going to really be using this for if you're in a low light situation like the sun is setting. And the only time that you use below f4 about is when you're shooting indoors and it's very low light and there's not much natural light. Alrighty, now we've learned about ISO, shutter speed, aperture, and the Sunny 16 rule. It's time to actually take a photo. So here's the subject. It's my teddy bear. His name is Dan. I'm going to bring the camera up, point it towards him, and now we're looking through the viewfinder right now. So you're seeing what the camera sees. And from here, you're going to have to put the image in focus. So changing the focus of the image is done with this dial right here. This is indicating how many feet or meters the subject should be away from the camera to be in focus. So let's say it's about 3.5 feet, that's a good guess. We can then go to the viewfinder and make that a little bit better. And there we go. The image is now in focus. And from here, you're able to take a photo. And you saw that right there. That little flash of black, that was the shutter opening and closing. And we took that picture with 1.8 aperture because we're indoors and it's a low light setting. So we want to make sure that you get a clear image. And that is how you take a picture with a manual camera. Alrighty, now to apply the knowledge that we just learned about the manual camera to digital camera. So this is a digital camera. It's pretty cool, but it's got pretty much all the same components as the manual camera. As you can see on the lens, we've got a knob which is changing the focus, and we've got another knob which is changing the aperture, just like the manual camera. Now, a lot of digital cameras have autofocus, but when you're doing videography for like films and things like that, you tend to want to use manual focus because it can be more precise. So let's now show you how to use this digital camera, but that'll be looking through the eyes of the digital camera. Alrighty, now we've learned how to use the manual camera, and we're looking through the lens of the digital camera, and I'm going to show you how they compare. So right now the image is in focus. If I turn the dial, just like with the manual camera, just now in the digital one, it changes the focus. You see us going in and out of focus. There we are. I can also change the aperture. Right now it's at about 2.8 f-stop. I'm going to bring it up, and you can see the inside getting darker, but outside becoming more clear. Gets brighter outside, darker inside. And then as I lower the aperture, you can see it looks pretty overexposed outside, but it's more clear inside. Now I can also change the ISO for this camera. Right now it is set at 500. That's the native ISO of this camera. The native ISO is just the ISO of the sensor, which the camera picks up the best image quality. But you can change the ISO from 500. Now it's 640. Now it's 800, which is the same as the Portra film. You can bring this all the way up to 2500, which is the other native ISO for this camera. It's got a dual native ISO. So ISO functions a bit differently on the digital camera. Instead of representing the sensitivity to light of the film, it's just representing how much light the sensor is picking up. So same concept, but it is a different mechanism. So we're going to bring this down to 800, and we'll keep it there. Time to now look at the shutter speed. So for the shutter speed, if you're taking photos, it works exactly the same as the manual camera. It's changing how much time light is allowed into the camera. So if you have a very long shutter speed, it's going to end up exposing a lot more light onto the camera. And if you move the camera around, it'll be a blurry image. That's why you use a much faster shutter speed when you're taking pictures of things like sports or animals, and you can use a lower one when you're in low light situations and on a tripod. So let's change the shutter speed. Right now it's at 1/48 of a second. I can bring it down. Now it's 1/40th. Now it's 1/30th. You can see how the brightness is changing because it's allowing more and more light as it goes down. So now we are at 1/24th of a second. That's the lowest we can get it at. And you can see it's kind of a little bit laggy. As it moves around, the images are streaking a bit, blurring, stuff like that. But if I bring the shutter speed way up, so now we're at 1/160th of a second, much sharper image, a lot less blurring and streaking. I can bring it up even more to really show you just how much this can do. And see, now the image is hardly blurring at all. And that is at 1/400th of a second for the shutter speed. And now, manual cameras also have the FPS, or the frames per second, that they're shooting at. And that is not something that the manual camera has. But it's a pretty simple concept. It's essentially just how many pictures it's taking per second. And so that is going to have the effect of making things look either very stuttery if you have a low frames per second, because there's a lot more time between frames, or you can have that buttery smooth 60 FPS video where everything is just super smooth. So high shutter speed and high FPS equals smoother video, and low shutter speed and low FPS equals a less smooth video. That's pretty much everything now. I hope that you have learned a bit about how to use the camera, both manual and a digital, and how the knowledge to use them is actually pretty similar. So I encourage everyone to go out. If you've got a camera, I'm sure everyone has a phone, take some photos, figure out what you want to do, learn how to use stuff. Most phones have settings, at least with the newer iPhones, where you can change the ISO. You usually can't change the aperture of phone cameras, but you can mess around with things like the shutter speed and FPS of the video, ISO, focus, of course, things like that. So yeah, have a good one, everyone.